The cold wind whipped across the barren slopes of Mount Taygetus, carrying with it the faint cries of the abandoned. For the Spartans, these weren't cries of sorrow, but echoes of a harsh truth. Weakness had no place in their world. This wasn't just a military dictum. It was the foundation of their very existence, starting not on the battlefield, but in the most intimate corners of life, the bedroom and the birthing chamber. Forget the romanticized images of crimson cloaks and heroic last stands. The true Sparta was a chilling experiment in human engineering, a society built on a single, ruthless principle, forged the deadliest human weapons the ancient world had ever seen, even if it meant sacrificing every shred of humanity in the process. This disturbing truth began with absolute state control over reproduction. In Sparta, the concept of love, personal choice, or even individual desire withered under the iron fist of civic duty. The government wasn't just a matchmaker, it was a breeder, meticulously pairing citizens, not for affection, but for genetic superiority. Imagine a scene venerable magistrates, their faces etched with the scars of countless battles, scrutinizing young men and women as if they were livestock. He, they might decree, is a tall, broad-shouldered warrior, descendant of a line of heroes. She, they'd declare, is a strong, fertile woman with wide hips and a sturdy frame, promising many robust offspring. Beauty wasn't admired for its aesthetic grace, but for what it signified: robust health, a potent bloodline. Marriages were cold, strategic alliances, devoid of sentiment, designed solely to produce the next generation of super soldiers. Love was a dangerous distraction, desire an optional bonus. The individual body, with all its yearnings and vulnerabilities, ceased to be its own. It belonged to Sparta, a mere vessel for the state's insatiable need for strength. Every citizen's primary duty was to contribute to this national imperative through their bloodline. Even the roles of women, in a world where Greek women were often cloistered and silent, were twisted into something uniquely Spartan. They were not wives in the conventional sense, nor mothers defined by tenderness, but rather living incubators for the Spartan nation. Their worth was inextricably linked to their capacity to bear strong, healthy children. From their earliest years, Spartan girls were rigorously trained, not for weaving or domestic arts, but for childbirth. They ran, wrestled, and hurled javelins, their bodies meticulously conditioned to endure the rigors of gestation and delivery. Their individual will, their personal aspirations, were irrelevant. Their physical prowess, their biological capacity, was everything. They were taught, with an unwavering intensity, that their true battlefield was the birthing bed, and their ultimate honor lay in delivering a future soldier into the state's waiting hands. But Sparta's chilling pragmatism extended even further, into realms that border on the monstrous by modern standards. What happened if a celebrated warrior's wife struggled to conceive, or if her children were deemed too frail? What if, across the city, lived a woman of exceptional health, married to an older, less formidable man? Sparta had an answer, a clause in its social code that was as brutal as it was logical. It not only permitted but actively encouraged a strong warrior to father a child with another man's wife. This wasn't seen as adultery, a moral transgression. It was a civic duty, a pragmatic necessity. A woman's womb could be loaned in service of the state, and often her husband would acquiesce. Recognizing the greater good, to produce a strong child, even if fathered by another, was considered an honor to the household and, more importantly, to Sparta itself. Concepts like romantic love, fidelity, or personal jealousy were systematically crushed beneath the marching boots of state-sanctioned eugenics. The ultimate goal was not personal happiness or familial bliss, but the ruthless perfection of the bloodline. And so, when a Spartan child finally entered the world, it was not met with unbridled joy and celebration. It was a moment of stark judgment, a terrifying test. The newborn was not immediately cradled in its mother's arms. Instead, it was whisked away to a grim, foreboding place known as the Lecce, the Gathering Hall. There, a council of aged warriors, the Gerusia, awaited. These men, hardened by decades of war, viewed life through the stark lens of death and survival. Without a flicker of emotion, they meticulously examined each infant. Naked and vulnerable, the baby was scrutinized from head to toe, its limbs, its spine, the very strength of its cry, every perceived flaw, every whisper of weakness could seal its fate. This wasn't cruelty born of malice, but of what Spartans believed was absolute necessity. They were a tiny, elite warrior caste, perpetually encircled by hostile neighbors and an immense, enslaved Helot population that outnumbered them 10 to 1. In such a precarious existence, weakness was not merely a personal misfortune. It was an existential threat, not just to one child, but to the entire state. A frail infant was not merely a burden. It was a potential vulnerability, a chink in the armor of their collective strength. Mercy today, they reasoned, could mean destruction tomorrow. Sparta's unyielding creed was survival through strength, and there were no exceptions. The council's decision was absolute, final, and utterly without appeal. If the infant passed this brutal inspection, it was returned to its family, not as a beloved son, but as a future soldier, already belonging irrevocably to the state. From the moment he drew his first breath, a Spartan child's destiny was irrevocably sealed. But if the elders' judgment fell against him, if they deemed him unfit for life, his end came not by sword or drowning. His demise was far colder, a silent erasure. The infant was carried to the desolate slopes of Mount Taygetus, to a chasm known as the Apothete, the deposits. There, within a dark cleft of stone, the newborn was left to the mercies of the biting wind, the unforgiving night frost, and the scavenging beasts. A quiet death, unwitnessed and unspoken of. To Spartan logic, this was not murder. They believed they were simply returning to nature, that which nature had produced imperfectly, a grim offering to the collective strength, a testament to their unyielding will to survive. Passing the elders, inspection was only the beginning of a Spartan's journey. From that moment, the child's life became a slow, inexorable march toward war, and for his parents, their duty did not end with birth. The state demanded more, the constant creation of new bodies to fuel its insatiable war machine. Procreation in Sparta was not a privilege, but a sacred, unyielding obligation. They practiced, centuries before the term was coined, a form of eugenics, the belief that humankind could be perfected through selective breeding. This ideology didn't emerge from the laboratories of the 20th century. It was born in these rocky hills, driven not by hatred, but by a ruthless, chilling practicality. Weakness, in any form, had no place in their carefully cultivated bloodline. To achieve this, the most private human act became a public duty. Love, as we understand its tender complexities, had no place in this stark formula. Men, from the tender age of 7 until 30, lived exclusively in communal barracks among their comrades. Husbands would sneak from camp under the shroud of darkness to lie briefly with their wives, quietly, hurriedly, their union purely functional, only to vanish before sunrise to avoid severe punishment. There was no semblance of household life, no time or space to nurture affection or build intimacy. The wife was a relative stranger, chosen for her physical attributes, not for her heart or companionship. Their hurried union had one singular, paramount goal: conception. Once a child was expected, the man would return to his true family, the army, his mission accomplished. This entire system was meticulously designed to crush any nascent attachment, to ensure that devotion was directed solely and utterly towards Sparta. Strong family bonds were viewed as a potential betrayal. Romantic love, a dangerous and distracting weakness, and so, The state actively punished those who dared to refuse marriage or reproduction. A man who remained single beyond the required age was branded a disloyal citizen, a deserter of his most fundamental civic duty. During certain festivals, these men were publicly humiliated, paraded naked through the freezing streets, forced to sing mocking songs about their personal failure. They were denied the honors and respect granted to married elders, treated as outcasts, living proof that in Sparta, private life was, in every conceivable way, everyone's business. The cost of this ideology was immeasurable. Compassion, empathy, and tenderness slowly faded from the fabric of daily life. Generation after generation was conditioned to believe that softness was weakness, that one's body belonged not to the self, but to the state, and that motherhood was not an expression of love, but a grim, vital service. Children learned not affection from their parents, but absolute obedience from their rigorous trainers. Mothers, famously, would hand their 7-year-old sons over to the state with the chilling instruction, "Return with your shield, or on it." That iconic phrase was not empty pride. It was the chilling culmination of a culture that had systematically erased maternal love, replacing it with a fanatical, unwavering devotion to Sparta's glory. If reproduction was the forging of raw material, and inspection, the initial testing, then at 7 years old, came the true assembly of the weapon. The state that had engineered his very birth now came to claim absolute ownership. This was the beginning of the Agoj, the harshest, most relentless, and arguably most effective training program ever devised by humankind. It was a system designed not merely to train children, but to shatter their individuality and rebuild them in the terrifying image of the perfect warrior. Picture it. You are 7 years old, a child torn from the only warmth and familiarity you've ever known. Your mother, stoic and unweeping, simply hands you over. From that moment, your new family is your agella, your training unit, your cold, unforgiving barracks. Your father figure becomes an instructor, not to teach you the gentle arts of reading or writing, but the brutal necessity of endurance. You will not live in a true home again until you are 30, and by then, the very word home will have lost all meaning, replaced by the camaraderie and cold comfort of the military unit. The first fundamental lesson of the Agoj was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. The Spartan boy slept on a bed he had to construct himself, tearing reeds by hand from the muddy banks of the Eurotas River. No knives, no tools allowed. His only clothing was a single, rough tunic, the same garment serving him through the searing summers and the brutal, freezing winters. And above all else, he was perpetually, agonizingly hungry. The rations were intentionally meager, a slow, calculated starvation planned with mathematical precision. Yet, this deprivation wasn't merely cruelty for its own sake. It was a strategic imperative. The boys were explicitly ordered to make up the caloric difference on their own, through theft. In Sparta, stealing was not a vice. It was a vital lesson. It honed stealth, sharpened patience, and cultivated daring qualities essential for a warrior. A soldier who couldn't slip unseen into an enemy camp and procure vital supplies was, in their estimation, utterly worthless. So, the boys learned to move like shadows through their own city, scavenging for scraps with the predatory instincts of wolves. But if you were caught, the punishment was swift and merciless flogging, not for the act of theft itself, but for the unforgivable sin of incompetence, for being foolish enough to get caught. The message was branded deep into their psyche. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death, not just for you, but potentially for everyone beside you. The Agoj ensured that this brutal lesson was seared into their flesh, making it an indelible part of their being. This wasn't merely training soldiers. It was manufacturing predators lean, sharp, calculating, and utterly stripped of ordinary morality. In their brutal world, right and wrong dissolved into one stark question. Did you succeed, or did you fail? They learned to lie, to vanish, to instinctively read weakness in others, and to obey without a whisper of hesitation. They were indeed brothers, but brothers bound by shared pain, fierce rivalry, and a constant, gnawing fear. Starvation and sanctioned theft were only the opening chapters of the Agoge. The subsequent lessons were far darker, designed to break the child's mind before it could be rebuilt. The human body adapts with remarkable resilience to hunger, cold, and physical blows. But the true war of the Agoge was waged inside the skull. Sparta didn't just need brute muscle. It needed minds honed to razor sharpness, spirits emptied of self, utterly loyal only to the state. Having conquered the body, the instructors now targeted the soul, their most potent weapon. Silence. Our very word, laconic, meaning brief in speech, derives from Laconia, the region of Sparta. This is no mere coincidence. Spartan children were rigorously taught that words were tools, precise instruments, never frivolous toys. Idle chatter, a foolish remark, or a pointless question was severely punishable. Teachers hurled questions designed to provoke sharp, precise, and insightful answers. Hesitation, dullness, or an inadequate response was met not with verbal reprimand, but with immediate, unforgettable pain. Sometimes, an instructor would bite the offender's thumb, a small but agonizing lesson in the critical importance of thinking before speaking. Silence became a form of armor, a shield. Every word uttered had to strike with the precision and impact of an arrow. Yet, often, the worst cruelties didn't emanate from their elders. They came from within their own ranks, from each other. The hierarchical structure of the training units ensured this. Older boys, known as arenas, ruled the younger boys like petty tyrants, acting as commanders, jailers, and tormentors all in one. During meals, they would launch verbal ambushes. Who is the bravest man in Sparta? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Is theft honorable? There were no right answers, only cunning traps. A stumble, a pause, the wrong tone, a moment of doubt, all invited immediate ridicule, public humiliation, or physical blows. Humiliation was not only public and constant, but deliberately institutionalized. This wasn't random bullying. It was a state-designed system to forge minds that could remain cold, calculating, and unyielding under intense interrogation or amidst the chaos of battle. Each child learned to think like a seasoned politician and fight like a cornered beast, navigating a minefield of words and glances where one mistake could mean pain, disgrace, or even temporary exile. Rivalry was the essential fuel that drove them. Aggression earned respect. Trust no one. Expose others' weaknesses. Hide your own. These were not mere suggestions. They were commandments, the unwritten law of the pack, supervised and enforced by the state itself. All this daily brutality culminated in one of the most horrifying rituals of all. The ceremony at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Artemis, goddess of the wild and paradoxically protector of the home, demanded a bloody offering. Cheeses were placed upon her sacred altar. The boys' task, simple in theory, was to run, seize them, and escape. But to reach the altar, they had to sprint through a gauntlet of whips. Leather lashes sliced through the air, tearing flesh with every desperate step. This wasn't a contest of speed or reflexes. It was a brutal test of one thing alone: how much agony a future Spartan could endure without breaking. The true test was never about stealing cheese. It was about standing utterly silent under the relentless sting of the whip, enduring excruciating agony without a scream, a tear, or the faintest sign of weakness. To cry out, to show any hint of pain, was to bring indelible disgrace upon oneself and one's unit. Plutarch himself described young Spartans dying at the altar, their faces often twisted into a smile, even as their lifeblood soaked the ground, dying proud, having proven themselves worthy. This was their grim graduation, the agoge's final, bloody ceremony, a baptism by pain meant to purge every last trace of fear and softness, forging boys into living, unyielding steel. But when a society systematically burns away every perceived weakness, what fragments of humanity are left behind? What remains of the soul after it has been hammered into a weapon of war? What Sparta created was a profound paradox. Men of unmatched physical strength, yet emotionally hollow. Warriors of flawless discipline, yet with a warped and brutal morality. In their stark world, killing could be honorable, and compassion could be a fatal weakness. They were the perfect instruments of violence, honed to lethal precision. And now, the state demanded proof that they could serve its darkest, most unspoken needs. That proof came through something few dared to even mention, a secret and terrifying institution, the Cryptia. It was not a traditional military unit, fighting in formation on a battlefield. It was something far more sinister, a covert death squad, a machine of fear designed to keep Sparta's internal enemies silent and submissive. To truly comprehend its horror, one must grasp Sparta's greatest, most consuming obsession: absolute control. A tiny, elite warrior class ruled over an immense population of enslaved helots, who outnumbered them many times over. The Spartans lived with the constant gnawing terror of helot revolt, a fear that permeated every aspect of their society. Their brutal answer was terror, meticulously calculated and preemptive. Each year, a select group of elite graduates from the agoge, the strongest, most cunning, and utterly ruthless, were chosen for the Cryptia. They were sent into the countryside armed with nothing but a dagger and a few meager scraps of food. Their orders were chillingly simple: hide by day, move by night, and kill without hesitation. Their prey, the help, but not just any help, only the boldest, the most capable, those who dared to show any sign of leadership or dissent. Those who rose even slightly above the oppressed masses. These young men became the invisible scythe that ruthlessly cut down any stalk taller than the field, eliminating potential leaders before they could even emerge. This was their final exam, their ultimate transformation. To murder an unarmed man under the cover of darkness was not combat. It was a grotesque form of psychological surgery, a brutal ritual meant to prove, irrevocably, that every last vestige of mercy and human empathy had been completely erased from their hearts. They were no longer killing out of rage or in self-defense. They killed solely because the state had deemed it necessary, and to make this all legally permissible, the Spartan government performed a chilling bureaucratic ritual of its own. Each year, the Ephors, Sparta's ruling magistrates, formally declared war on the helots. It was a sterile, bureaucratic act with monstrous implications. Once officially declared enemies, helots could be slaughtered without it legally counting as murder. The killers of the Cryptia were not criminals. They were soldiers carrying out the legitimate will of the state, a convenient fiction that transformed mass murder into a civic duty, a testament to Sparta's chilling pragmatism. By the time his dagger was stained with helot blood, the Spartan had completed his horrific transformation. He had been born as a child of the state, shaped by relentless discipline, stripped of all conventional emotion, and now proven capable of killing without hesitation or remorse. But what, truly, had he become? The defender of civilization, or its most efficient, cold-blooded predator? At the age of 30, the Spartan could finally leave the communal barracks. But his so-called freedom was largely an illusion. A new, equally demanding duty awaited him: to reproduce, to raise the next generation of instruments for Sparta's relentless war machine. The killer now had to become a father. His bride, chosen by the state, was not a submissive, cloistered wife, but his equal in strength, conviction, and unwavering dedication to Sparta's ideals. Spartan women were not mere victims of this brutal system. They were its formidable pillars. While boys endured the agoge, girls entered their own rigorous training regimen. one equally demanding and ideologically charged. In a Greece where women were often confined to their homes, silenced, and treated as property, Spartan women stood in stark contrast. They were educated, physically trained, and empowered to manage property and vast estates. Why? Because Sparta's singular focus was not on comfort or domesticity, but on breeding strength, resilience, and unwavering loyalty. Everything, every child, every law, every marriage, served one overarching purpose: to forge a race of perfect warriors. Even the philosopher Plato, observing from Athens, expressed admiration for this unique system, believing it mirrored his own vision of an ideal society. But he fundamentally misunderstood it. The aim was not equality in the sense of modern justice. It was ruthless efficiency, reproductive precision, and unwavering ideological indoctrination. Spartan women were molded to suppress tenderness and replace it with fierce patriotism. Their worth was judged not by their affection or beauty, but by the caliber of warriors they gifted to the state. They became legends of cold, discipline, and unwavering resolve. A Spartan mother, famously, handing her son his shield before battle, would tell him, "Return with it, or upon it, either victorious or dead on his shield," never having fled. When news of defeat or heavy losses reached the city, other Greek mothers would openly weep and mourn. Spartan mothers, however, would demand to know only one thing: did we win? One chilling tale even recounts a woman who killed her own son for returning home in disgrace. They were not passive bystanders in this brutal drama. They were the fierce, unyielding guardians of Spartan ideology itself, embodying its iron will, with minds and bodies shaped entirely by the state. Marriage in Sparta was far from an act of love or romantic courtship. It was an engineered ritual, a cold performance of duty. The process itself resembled an abduction. The groom did not court his bride. He seized her in the dead of night. Her attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her waiting in darkness on a bed of straw. He would come to her secretly, fulfill his duty quickly, and return to the barracks before sunrise, ensuring no emotional ties could form. This strange, almost primal ceremony had a profound purpose. It ensured emotional detachment, preventing domestic affection from interfering with paramount military loyalty. By keeping their meetings brief and clandestine, the state believed passion would remain high, making conception more likely, without the dangerous distraction of love or comfort. It was the pinnacle of the Spartan system, two products of intense indoctrination. Male and female, joined in darkness, bound not by love but by immutable decree. Their mission was singular: to reproduce strength, to ensure the continuation of the perfect soldier paired with the perfect mother, the human assembly line of Sparta. Yet, within this chilling perfection, a slow, silent poison began to fester. For 3 centuries, the machine of Sparta worked flawlessly. It dominated Greece, its warriors unmatched, its discipline legendary, its very name inspiring terror and awe. But the fatal flaw that would ultimately destroy it was not external. It was bred into the very system itself. The first poison was demographic collapse, Sparta's ruthless eugenics, the abandonment of weak infants on Mount Taygetus. The systematic rejection of all imperfection created an incredibly narrow gene pool. Every warrior lost in battle was not just a casualty. It was an irreplaceable tragedy, the loss of decades of meticulous training and a carefully preserved bloodline. Other cities could raise new armies, drawing from broader populations. Sparta, however, could not easily replace 100 of its highly specialized equals. Their greatest strength, their elite exclusivity, slowly but inexorably became their fatal weakness. They were, quite literally, breeding themselves out of existence. The second poison was profound inflexibility. The Agoge created impeccably disciplined soldiers, but not thinkers. Sparta produced warriors who could follow orders flawlessly, execute tactics with lethal precision, but who struggled to innovate, to question, to adapt to changing circumstances. As warfare evolved, their rigid system remained frozen in time, adhering to outdated traditions. They were perfect soldiers, but trapped in a world that increasingly demanded brilliant generals, strategists, and adaptable minds. When confronted by new tactics and creative military minds, they found themselves fighting ghosts of their own past, unable to adapt their unyielding methods. And the final, corrosive blow came ironically with success itself. When Sparta finally triumphed over its longtime rival Athens in the grueling Peloponnesian War, the floodgates opened. Persian silver and gold, tribute from their conquests and alliances, poured into their previously austere city. Wealth, the very thing Lycurgus, their legendary lawgiver, had so vehemently forbidden, began to corrode their iron discipline. Land ownership became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. Greed slowly but surely replaced the cherished Spartan ideals of austerity and communal living. Corruption, like a slow-acting venom, seeped into every rank, every institution. Spartans who had once prided themselves on despising luxury found themselves increasingly enslaved by it. The very spirit of Sparta, built on a foundation of fierce equality and brutal simplicity, began to rot from within. Then came Leuctra. On that fateful plain in 371 BCE, Theban general Epaminondas shattered centuries of Spartan invincibility. Instead of spreading his forces thin, he innovated, concentrating his left wing an unheard of 50 men deep, and rammed it straight into the Spartan right, where the king and his elite royal guard stood. Innovation crushed rigidity. The seemingly unbreakable Spartan phalanx collapsed under the sheer weight and force of the Theban oblique order. For the first time in living memory, a Spartan king fell in battle, his army annihilated beside him. Sparta's power was utterly broken, with hundreds of its finest men dead. The city's warrior caste was crippled beyond any hope of recovery. The empire that had terrified Greece for generations faded into irrelevance, its once mighty roar reduced to a mournful whisper. By the Roman era, centuries later, Sparta had become little more than a morbid curiosity, a living museum where fascinated travelers came to watch theatrical reenactments of its brutal customs, faint echoes of a once great civilization. In the end, the chilling tale of Spartan breeding practices and the agouge is far more than mere history. It is a profound, unsettling warning. It speaks of a people so utterly obsessed with perfection, so consumed by the need for ultimate strength, that they systematically sacrificed everything truly human to achieve it. They succeeded, with terrifying efficiency, in creating the perfect warrior, and in doing so, they sealed their own extinction. The brutal machine that forged heroes eventually consumed itself, leaving behind nothing but scattered ruins and the chilling whisper of a greatness built on relentless cruelty and ultimately undone by its own remorseless perfection.